Hello, good people of St. Martin, and welcome to the Integrity Chamber's video series, Let's Talk About Integrity. I'm your host, Kevin James, and today we're going to discuss the topic of conflicts of interest. I have a very special guest with me today to help us gain some more insight into this subject matter, the director of the Integrity Chamber, Ms. Charna Pompier. Charna, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. So for us to get started, of course, I just want to give the people of St. Martin a chance to get to know you a little better. And so I want to start by asking you to just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Kevin. As you said, my name is Charna Pompier. I'm the director of the Integrity Chamber. As a director, I am in charge of the day-to-day activities of the Integrity Chamber, and I have the honor of leading a young group of dynamic professionals who are working on improving integrity within government.
So next, I'd like to just, I always like to start from your perspective, right? What does integrity look like to you in your context?
Good question. So I love the phrase, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's looking, because there's two aspects to that. There is the doing the right thing, which we know isn't always easy, especially when people around you are not doing the right thing. And then there's doing the right thing for the right reasons. Because if you don't do it for the right reasons, then you're not going to do it when nobody's looking. You'll be doing it then just for appearances. So I think those are two, actually important aspects of integrity.
Wise words. So now that we have an idea of what integrity means to you, let's start to now relate it back to the topic, which is related to civil service. So what would you say, from your perspective, is the importance of integrity in civil service?
Integrity in civil service is very important. The reason for that is that without it, you would have unequal treatment, you would have misconducts happening, you would have basically a government that is open to all types of integrity issues, which you would want to avoid.
But let's get down to what it really means. What is a conflict of interest?
So a conflict of interest is any personal interest that conflicts with your professional duties or your job responsibilities. For instance, if you're in a position of authority, if you're in a decision-making position, I should say, and you have a personal interest, such as a financial interest, or a relationship, such as a family member or a friendship that would affect the way or can influence the way you make a decision, then that's a conflict of interest.
Okay. And just so that we can put that into a practical scenario, can you provide an example of a conflict of interest?
So a good example would be if you are a head of a department and you're trying to arrange a service that's needed for the department, and you get several offers in, and one of those offers happen to be from a family member, let's say your cousin, then that would obviously be a conflict of interest, right? Because as that person being your family member, you might be more inclined to choose their offer over the other offers. So that would be an example of a situation where you would want to remove yourself from that to avoid a conflict of interest.
Very good that you said that, because you're already touching on one of the other questions I'm going to ask you, which is how we can avoid them. But before we do that, I do want the people of St. Martin to also have a deeper understanding of some of the integrity risks that can come as a result of a conflict of interest, so that they understand why it's important for us to try to avoid this. What are some of those risks?
Well, one of them that we mentioned before is unequal treatment. So in that same example that I just gave, you would have a situation where other offers might just be ignored or not even properly considered because of that conflict, because you know somebody and because of your relationship with them, you go with their service over the service of everybody else. And that obviously creates a situation of unequal treatment. Another risk could be a financial risk to government when there are conflicts of interest. And then there are also a reputational risk for not only the government itself, but for the individual.
Right, because then personal integrity becomes a concern as well, that your roles are not conflicting. And so the next thing I'd like for us to do is to look at the why. I always like to try to see what's going on behind the situation. And so I want to get your input on this. Why do you think conflicts of interest occur?
So I think one of the reasons might be is because there's a lack of awareness. We don't stop to think about the fact that a situation might be a conflict of interest, that because of my relationships, family, friendships, or different things, that there might be a conflict of interest there. And I think the fact that St. Martin is such a small society where everybody knows each other, and, I think just about everybody knows somebody working in government who is in a position of authority, I think that makes it even more difficult. So I think that's one of the reasons why there may be conflict of interest, but that also means that it's more important for us to be aware of it. And another reason is that sometimes we do the right thing the wrong way. For example, there might be a situation where we're going with the offer from our family member, not because we're trying to create an unequal situation, but because we know, for instance, that family member provides really good quality and they can do a really good job. Yeah. And then we think, hey, I'm actually doing a good thing by hiring my family member. But again, we have to realize that you become biased in that situation, and there might be other people out there who can also provide maybe just as good quality or a higher quality, but now they're automatically excluded from the process because of your relationship with that family member.
Exactly. That's a really good perspective. And I think that's why it's so important that we're having this conversation so we understand the consequences of a conflict of interest, because indeed your heart may be in the right place, but is everyone being treated fairly?
Correct.
And that's ultimately what we need to prioritize.
Yes.
And so that leads into my next question, which is, how do we prevent these conflicts of interest? What can we do to help to mitigate conflicts of interest?
So the first thing is to disclose it. Okay. You need to think for yourself, is this a situation that could be considered a conflict of interest? And if that's the case, you need to report it. Let your manager know so that they can look at the process, and perhaps you can be removed from that process to make sure that the situation is dealt with as impartially as possible.
So basically you're saying we should talk about it.
Definitely.
That's one of the ways, okay?
Yes, and the next one would be to be transparent, because it doesn't matter if you remove yourself from it, and from the outside looking in, it still looks as if there was a conflict of interest. Right. People might still think, oh, that person was only hired because of their connection in that department, or a job offer, not a job offer, but an offer to do a service was only, considered, an example that we had earlier, because of that person who they know in the department. So it's important for there to be transparency, that people know, hey, no, this was the process that was followed, and it was done as impartial as possible to ensure that everyone was treated fairly. Indeed, transparency is crucial for integrity, taking into consideration confidentiality, of course. Exactly. Right. And finally, and maybe most importantly, is that there needs to be a policy in place. Because without a policy, then everybody's still doing it the way they personally think it should be done, and not with a complete impartial view of how it should be done. So lastly, I would just like to open the floor and give you the opportunity in case there's anything else that you'd like to add. Well, I hope that this conversation that we had shed some light on the topic of conflicts of interest. And I hope this video series in general can have people starting to discuss integrity and why it's so important within government and within our society as a whole. So I'm looking forward to the feedback, and I hope that everybody really enjoys the series. I feel the same way. And I'd like to thank you, Charna, for taking the time to share with us today. Thank you, Kevin. To the people of St. Martin, I also hope that this conversation was beneficial to you, and we want to thank you for supporting us in our mission to build integrity for future generations. Stay tuned for the next video in our series, Let's Talk About Integrity.